So we're on our third lesson. We're continuing with the Intertestamental Period. I hope you guys got all read up. I had given you Maccabees, and there was also an assignment of reading chapter 8 as well as chapter 11. If you have questions about the symbolism and what was going on in those two chapters, we can discuss it after this class. So what we're going to be dealing with is Greece, Alexandria, as well as his successors. So here we go. I can't see. Why was Alexandria significant as it pertains to Jewish history? Let me move this out of the way. One of the main reasons was, as you saw in the documentary of Alexandria the Great, Alexandria was going through conquering everything, killing, destroying, and making individuals submit under his rule. So it was significant to Jewish history because there was a possibility in him moving across these lands, especially when he got to Israel and Judah, mainly Jerusalem. There was a possibility that he was capable of destroying the seed to the line to Christ. Now, he was significant because it was prophesied, as you guys remember in our Daniel readings, that Greece would destroy Medo-Persia, but not Jerusalem. Judah, which is also called Judea, they were praying to God for help. Now let's pause for a moment and talk about this story with Judea, the priest. Judea was committed and connected to Persia, the leader Darius in Persia. So when Alexandria was moving across the land, he sent messengers to Jerusalem, where Judea the priest was at. And I don't know if you remember in the documentary, that portion of the documentary. So when the messenger came, Judea had told them, well, I've already made a commitment to Darius of Persia, so I can't switch now and make a commitment to you. So Alexandria was pissed about that. Now, the miracle that occurred in the midst of all of this is Judea prayed, the priest. He prayed to God. And so on Alexandria's side, Alexandria ended up having this dream that he saw this priestly guy in these garments and all these people dressed in white, and that if he paid homage to them, it didn't destroy them, he would be even more powerful in conquering. So when he gets there, and Judea knows he's on the way, when he gets there, Judea had all the people to dress in white, and he's dressed in his priestly garment. So when Alexandria arrives, he bows down to this priest because of this dream that he had. Now his soldiers and commanders are looking at him like, you must be crazy. We need to take them on. They defied us. So that's what spared Jerusalem, which is significant to him not destroying the seed to the line to Christ. Now, Alexandria is conquering everywhere. We know he was conquering everywhere. So when he gets to Egypt, they had oracles back then, which you probably saw in the documentary. So the oracles of Ammon, now here Alexandria is standing in Egypt with all of his thousands and thousands of troops. And so he goes before him to confirm with the oracle, am I truly the son of Zeus? Well, they tell him, sure, yeah, you're the son of Zeus. And if you remember from the documentary, his mom was constantly telling him that he was a demigod, part God and part man, that he wasn't actually Philip's son. So because of this, he just believes and knows, I'm totally invincible. So continuing Alexandria and his history, he establishes the city in Egypt called Alexandria. He then populates it with the Jews. Now, we've had that encounter in Jerusalem with Judea, the priest. So now he's got these folks, they're on his side. So he takes these Jews and he populates the city of Alexandria, which is very, very important to us in church history, and we'll talk about that later. So at this point, all the Alexandrians are speaking Greek. So the last battle that he had with Darius, he's fulfilling that prophecy in Daniel 8, chapter 8, verse 8. Now, as we know, Alexander died young. He ended up with an illness, and he was back in Babylon, I believe. And so on his deathbed, his wife was pregnant, but there was no heir to the throne. So that's when Alexander just stated, to the strongest, and he was talking to all of his commanders. So now we're going to take a look at after Alexandra died. So what we find here is all of the commanders of Alexandria. Now, if you recall in your readings, as well as me doing those little pictures and stuff, when we got to Greece, there was a leopard, and that leopard had 4 heads, remember, and the 4 wings. So initially, the Diacati, that's what they're called, the Diacati rulers, Alexander's commanders, started out with 7. So there's only 2 that's really significant to church history, but we're going to go through these guys to see the process of elimination. So you have Ptolemy, who had Egypt, Eumenes, who had Cappadocia and Paphlagonia, Lysicamus, who had Thrace, Seleucus, who ended up with Syria and Babylon, Antigonus, Lycia, Pamphylia, and Phrygia, and Antipater, who had Macedonia, and Cassander, who had Caria. Now we start seeing this process of elimination. We're drilling down now to the 4. So as I said, the 2 most important are Ptolemy and Seleucus. So I'm just giving you some history here, what happened to Eumenes. After the murder of Perdiccas in Egypt by his own soldiers, the Macedonian generals condemned Eumenes to death at the conference of Tripardises, assigning Antipater and Antigonus as his executioners. So we still have Lysicamus with Thrace and Seleucus with Syria and Babylon. Antigonus ends up dying in battle. He gets killed with a javelin, and Antipater ends after the assassination of Caesar, that goes back to Caesar, and then Octavius coming against Egypt. Antipater is next, and he was forced by a Roman to fight against Mark Antony. And here we start to see the beginnings of Rome and their politics start coming into history. So this particular Antipater is very essential. They killed him by poison, but look at the end of this. And if you're familiar with the New Testament, this is the father of Herod the Great. Okay, so we have Cassander. So now we have our 4 commanders, the 4 head of the leopards, the leopard in Daniel's vision. So we have Ptolemy, Lysicamus, Seleucus, and Cassander. But there's only 2 that we're going to really focus in on and are important to biblical history. So the Ptolemies and the Seleucus. Now, if you read Daniel chapter 11 for their link to the children of Israel, it will show you in great detail about these 2. So when we think about our lesson last week with Israel and Judah, we know about the divide. We know how those 2 split up, why they split up. So to the north, you have Syria, and they're dealing with Israel, right? And to the south, there's Egypt, the Ptolemy, and they're dealing with Judah, where Jerusalem is. And we know that Judah is where the seed of David and Jesus Christ comes from. So the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, there's a lot of guys listed here, but we're only really concerned at this point with the beginning of it, which is Ptolemy I Soter. He was Alexander's commander when everything was broken down and divided, and he was over Egypt. And Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who originated the Septuagint, and we've already discussed the Septuagint. It's important, I think, to take a peek also at this is where Cleopatra originated. And I think we might have talked about this before. I thought it was interesting how in history and in the movies and films, they portray Cleopatra, a woman of fair and light skin. It makes sense now because Cleopatra is a descendant of the Greeks. She wasn't indigenous to Africa or Egypt, so she couldn't have had black skin. So we're looking at the Seleucid dynasty, Syria. This dynasty, or the Seleucids, are most important as it pertains to biblical history. So we have the very first commander that went to Syria and took over all those lands in Syria, which is Seleucus first Nicator. Another one that's important in history is Antiochus III Magnus. He fought Rome and was defeated. So you see now in history, remember before in our lessons, Rome wasn't even significant. Rome was just a little old pea in the pot. But now Rome is rising up, and there's a lot of significant wars and battles and things that are happening with Rome. So it's essential because when Antiochus went to war with Rome, he was defeated. And that's how Rome began to gain all this territory and land because he had to surrender this. And a part of being defeated, he had to also turn over his son, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, to Rome as a hostage. And if you notice over to the right in blue, I have Antiochus IV Epiphanes is very essential to the Bible. And if you read Maccabees, you already know why. So these are continuations of the Seleucid dynasty. The only two significant on this list is Deodatus Tryphon, who ends up being a usurper, and I'll teach you about them in the next lesson next week. And then Seleucus the sixth Epiphanes. Here's another Epiphanes. This is when Syria fell into civil war with their own people. Mr. Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He was God's chosen people's nightmare. And they did something interesting. They did a twist on his name. He's called Antiochus IV Epiphanes, but they call him Antiochus IV Epiphanes, which means madman. So this brings us into why I had you guys to take a look and read the book of Maccabees, those chapters in there. And this relates back to the Apocrypha. So, why was he called the madman? He is mentioned in 1 Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 10. He was the sinful root, and they even gave him by his name, Antiochus Epiphanes. And he had been taken hostage in Rome. So he was just a, I don't know, insane, crazy kind of person, I guess coming up out of whatever abuses that Rome did to him when he was finally released and came back on the scene. But as I said before, he was the greatest threat against Judea, especially Jerusalem. Now, during his campaigns, he would, and campaigns mean his moving across the land in wars and defeating and taking on lands and things of this nature, taking people hostages and stuff. But on these trips, he would stop in Judea, to push Hellenism on the people of Judea, God's people. Hellenism, I put the definition down here for you, is a name given to the manifold achievements of the Greeks in social, political, arts, science, morals, and religion. I also put down, if you read Daniel 11, Daniel prophesied about Antiochus IV in 500 BC. Think about this, guys. And this prophecy did not start coming to manifest until 300 years later. So that goes back to us talking last week about time. Now, I thought it was so interesting and sad at the same time. one of his times that he stopped in Judea, there was a mother, she had 7 sons, and he wanted them to renounce Judaism. And you guys probably read about this. The torture that he took this woman's sons through in front of her, burning them alive, cutting their tongues out, peeling their skin from their body. He did some horrific things in front of this mother and killed her sons one by one. And the mother, as you probably read, was encouraged them to not renounce Judaism before this madman. So if you read in Maccabees, it discusses how Antiochus started the great massacre that you'll hear about in history or Bible lessons and stuff, and where the compromise of the Jews started coming on the scene. So one of the things he did was, when it says he went against Jerusalem, it meant he went to slaughter the people of Jerusalem. He took everything from their temple and their sanctuary. And the compromise of the Jews starts when he pushed and pressed upon them the priesthood becoming more of a political office. So they began to swap out their priestly duties, and based on what was passed down through history for the high priest to be more in a political position. He started to register the inhabitants, the people of Jerusalem, as citizens of Antioch. And that's in 2 Maccabees, chapter 4, 7 through 10, if you want to continue reading through the book of Maccabees. He brought in new customs that were forbidden by the law. And we talk about the law, we're talking about the law that God gave Moses. So he pressed upon them, put into place an alien religion, and mandated that there will be no more high priests. It further discusses that because of all of this oppression, the priests began to no longer be zealous for the services and the duty that they were mandated, passed down through Moses through all the generations at the altar. They despised the sanctuary. I guess they would, because of the brutality that Antiochus pressed upon them, and they began to neglect the sacrifices. They had no more regard. We were talking about how did they get so lost. Remember when I was talking about everything was being stripped from them. They lost all regard and respect for the honors of their forefathers, and switched over to, guess what, the Greeks and whatever their glories and whatever they believe and whatever their false gods are. That's the best thing ever. Forget Jehovah. This is what's good. So they even made a covenant, an agreement, a contract with the Gentiles. Now, you know, during those times, they didn't have any dealings or anything to do with the Gentiles, right? So they built a place of exercise in Jerusalem. Now, let me break this down. We see in modern times the Olympics and things of that nature. Well, all of that kind of stuff started back with the Greeks and them doing these exercises and competitions, throwing the disc and throwing the javelin and all of that kind of stuff. It started with the Greeks. And the Greeks, the men, they used to do all of this stuff in the nude. Okay, they performed all these exercises and did all of these things in the nude. I don't know for the life of me how they did it. Okay, but some kind of way they reversed their circumcision. I can't even fathom. I thought you cut the skin off, but they reversed their circumcision so that they could look like the Greeks. And that's why they did the reverse of the circumcisions, because these men perform these exercises and all of this stuff in the nude. So they have gone totally against everything that mandates or makes them Jews. Because if you remember back when Noah's son just saw him naked, right? That whole thing that happened. So now they're performing in the nude. So let me break down this Antiochus encounter with Rome at Egypt. Egypt is becoming now a huge force, right? They're moving and they're conquering. So Rome is aligned or allied with Egypt. During this time frame, Antiochus is conquering, and Antiochus keeps going to Egypt, conquering them, going off to battle with somebody else, coming back to Egypt, battling with them again. Well, it was just one time too many. I guess we can truly, concur to the fact that Antiochus was a bully, but he had a bully he had to come up against, which was Rome. So the Roman leader or commander is at Egypt. And when Antiochus comes with his troops this time, they give him a letter or a contract, a treaty, so to speak, to say, you know what? You're not coming back here to fight them no more. This is it. We draw the line. And you need to give us an answer today. Well, he's a cocky kind of guy. So he's like, man, whatever. I'm not considering Rome being here. Matter of fact, I'll go get some more soldiers and come back. But before he could make a move, the Roman commander took a stick and drew a circle around his body and said, you're not stepping out of this circle unless you answer us today. You're not coming back to Egypt no more to attack them. Well, he was outnumbered, so he leaves. He'd have been bullied, and he's pissed. And because of his anger, there were things going on in Jerusalem with the priests and the high priests trying to come up against the Hellenism. All of this stuff was going on back in Jerusalem that got back to him. So he's pissed. And now he's like, oh, I'm going to take this out on Jerusalem. You with me? So now he heads on to Jerusalem. And this is where Daniel's prophecy talks about the abomination of desolation. And if you've read through the New Testament, you hear Jesus Christ talk about the abomination of desolation. The abomination of desolation. This is where I've been saying to you guys off and on in our discussions, the Jews just being stripped of everything. So in First Maccabees, verse 1, chapter 1, 30 through 51, we begin to see the slaughter of the Jews. Antiochus IV cunningly, subtly spoke words of peace to them. I'm coming in peace. I'm coming to talk with you people. We're going to try to settle all these issues that's been going on while I've been off on my conquering and escapades. But he tricked them. He didn't come in peace. He slaughtered them. Went after the men and killed all the men. But he captured the women and the children and their cattle. He destroyed their homes, set the city on fire. Then he built a citadel. If you know what a citadel is, it like sets up on a hill, like up on a mountain. And it says he built the city of David. First he destroys it. Then he builds the city of David up with a great and strong wall with strong towers. And his whole goal was to make them a sinful nation. They were transgressors of the law. And he used this citadel, I'm talking about the Greeks, right? His people, the Syrians. So he used this citadel as a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary. Any of the Jews or these people even considering the thought to come to try to worship their God. And when they did, it says in the scripture, there was bloodshed on every side of the sanctuary. He defiled their sanctuary. He laid their sanctuary to waste so that they could not celebrate the Sabbath. So the Jews began to flee from Jerusalem, rightfully so. It makes sense. Let's get the heck up out of here or we're going to die. And then Jerusalem became a habitation of strangers, or Gentiles, as the word would say it. So let's continue with this madman, Antiochus. They were forced to forsake their own laws, those that remain. And so all of the nations, when they say nations, we're talking about the Jewish people, agreed to the word of Antiochus and began to sacrifice to idols. Now, there is Jerusalem, and then there are still all of these surrounding cities of Judah, right? So Antiochus was sending these messengers with letters mandating that all the cities of Judah adhere to the laws that he was giving them. Now, these letters forbid them to do whole burnt offerings. You know how they would bring the unblemished calf. We got 10 minutes. Let me keep going. How they were forbidden to bring the unblemished lamb or calf to sacrifice. So they couldn't do that anymore in their sanctuary. He profaned their Sabbaths. And, you know, they always had these feasts and things like this that they would do that was passed down from Moses. And the fact that you better not dare circumcise your son. And they were forced to build these altars and temples and shrines to make swine sacrifices, which were to Zeus. And we've talked about how swine were unclean beasts to the Jews. So finally, this enforcement was done so the Jews might forget their law, change all of their ordinances, and Antiochus mandated that who did not perform or follow his law, they would die. And to ensure this, he appointed overseers over all of the people and commanded the cities of Judah to sacrifice city by city. So, let me unmute you ladies.